Well, good evening, everyone. We're Thursday night, 6 o'clock, and you probably heard the chimes in the background. So, our topic this evening is going to be portable cockpit computers. Remember, we're working this from the perspective of someone who is starting out with cross country. And so, our focus is going to be on the handheld kind of things, not the ones that are necessarily permanently installed in the panel. All righty. So, here's our schedule. So we're on February 12th, Intro to Portable Gliding Computers. Notice that for the 26th and March 12th, February 26th and March 12th swapped. Um, Dr. Snyder was available for the 26th, and it was going to be an easier day for him to work on it than the 12th. So the 26th will be soaring pilot physiology, and the announcement should be out either from the SSA and from Wings shortly on that so that you've got the correct links for it when you register. And again, our normal intro slides. When it comes time to download, if you want to download the presentation, it's the members.ssa.org. You log in, go to your homepage, news, resources, and webinars, and then you can get both the slides and you can also get the recording again that we're making this evening. The Again, we're thanking the SSA for making the webinar software possible available for us, and for Frank doing the yeoman duty behind to make sure that this thing runs smoothly for us, and also our FAA safety team members, to make sure that we get Wings credit for this. Remember that you have to register for each individual webinar. I guess there are some other webinars that are sponsored by the SSA and others that you register once and you get the entire series. With this batch, it's each webinar has to get registered. And when you register, use your Wings email ID that you use for Wings. We have a couple of our instructors sitting in the background. One or more of the folks, you see their names on the screen. And if you've got questions, they'll attempt to answer. If it's appropriate, they'll interrupt and have me answer online. And then we will have a question and answer session at the end, like we usually do. All right, when we're looking at it for this evening, our goals is to understand the cockpit computer usage. The whole idea here is that we want to improve in-flight situational awareness, and then we're going to have a demonstration with one of the software packages that also happens to run on a PC, so I can illustrate some of the things that we're talking about through the rest of the session. Again, what we're talking about is a decision support system where we have data, it gets transformed into information, and from there we can use that information in order to make decisions. The key to remember with all of this is the information has to be good enough to make decisions. It doesn't have to be absolutely accurate. So close enough is usually good enough. So the whole question is the information good enough to make the decisions? It's really kind of interesting, when we look at this, because what we're trying to manage is we're trying to manage things to make it easier for the pilot to operate. Interestingly, it's often said that people can handle 5 plus or minus 2 tasks. And of course, every one of us assumes that we can immediately handle 7, if not more tasks, and we can handle them well. And of course, there are times that we run into that we may be lucky to handle one task and maybe just poorly. Okay, so the thing that we run into with our gliders is that we're usually in a single seat aircraft and we don't have anybody to share the workload with. And there are times when we're in a high stress and it's not a whole lot of fun. So maybe we can use automation to help that. When we're looking at our workload, we've got, in general, there are six things that we need to be doing. So first one's fly, fly the sailplane. And we've got to maintain an overall situational awareness of what's happening. We've got to navigate. We've got to analyze the data that's coming into us visually and orally. We've got to get that converted into information that we can make decisions on. We have to make the decisions, and then we have to execute on those decisions. And there are times when we're up there that just doing the first task takes about everything that we've got available. There are always questions that have to be asked, so where am I? And the technique that we're taught for that is pilotage. Where do I want to go? And the technique we're taught for that is dead reckoning. Which direction do I want to go? Can I get there from here? We start bringing together both pilotage and dead reckoning. And, the one that we always want to know is if we need it, where's the nearest place to land? So when I started flying cross country in a glider, uh, a few years back, we were working with marked up sectionals, and we had a circular slide rule in E6B, and the computer in the cockpit was the pilot's brain for part of it, and the E6B for, because we didn't weren't working with pencil and paper. We needed something that we could do calculations with that didn't require us to work on pencil and paper. Our navigation was piloted, so we were navigating by reference to the visual landmarks. Basically, look outside and what we would call orienteering today. And then we have dead reckoning, and the vast majority of that's pre-flight planning. So when we were planning our first cross countries, we were doing a whole lot more pre-flight planning than we probably more detail, not more planning, but more detail of planning than probably we need to do today with all the aids we have in the cockpit. And of course, the thing is, we create a plan for the flight, and I think it was Sun Tzu that made the comment that gets paraphrased as no plan survives first contact, but the planning does prepare us for what we're going to see in flight. So where can the computers help us? First one is that hopefully it can reduce the pilot workload. We want it to be able to improve our situational awareness. If that works, then we should be working with reduced stress, and hopefully we've got an increased enjoyment. So when we've got the computer, the first thing to remember is the computer does not make decisions for the pilot. And especially if it's a close decision, always check outside to cross-check the recommendation. I find it interesting when I'm navigating and it says, oh, the airport should be just off my right wing. This is some farmer's field out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm looking out there and going, well, the computer says, the map says, and I'm looking out and going, I don't see it. Okay, so, especially if you're setting up for an off-field landing, or when I say off-field, I mean this could be, Farmer John's International. But if you can't see it on the ground, that doesn't matter what the computer's telling you. The reality is what you're seeing when you look outside. So the 6 tasks that we had that I showed earlier, the computer can help with at least four of the 6 tasks. So it can help with navigation, maintaining a situational awareness. It assists in analyzing the data, and it supports our decision making. So it eases 4 of the 6 tasks that we have to work with. It shares the workload by answering questions. It helps us keep track of our current location. It helps us keep track of the current destination, updating the heading information to make sure we're pointed in the right direction. Provides overall destination solution, including, we got current altitude, the speed, the winds, and it can provide recommendations and a destination solution for nearby landable locations. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, if you're not properly utilizing the tool, then it can increase the pilot's workload, it can reduce your situational awareness, it can drive the stress up, and put you in a position to where, this is not as much fun as what it was when I didn't have the computer in the cockpit. Which leads to this. You've got to work out your learning curve and your usage issues on the ground. You've got to become familiar with it before you take off. This isn't a free ride. Using a computer in the cockpit is a new skill. So with that, you're going to have to take baby steps. Now, it's with most of the devices and the software that's out there now, it can work with the Condor simulator. And I'll talk a little bit about the interfaces in a couple more slides down. The other one is you can do it in a two-place sailplane. Uh, One of our instructors and I have gone out in a two-place in our K-21, and it's real interesting because our club years ago purchased two clear navs. So we have a front seat and a back seat clear nav. And one of the things that we found one day, we were out going and we realized that the databases in the two clear navs were different. The two clear navs were configured differently. So he was in the front seat and I was in the back seat. And what I said I was seeing, he didn't see because configuration management between the two devices in the cockpit, because ClearNavs don't have a mechanism to sync between them so that, one's the master and the other's the slave. That doesn't happen. So when I say you're in a two-place sailplane and you're trying to do this, especially if you've got two computers in there and you're working with somebody trying to cross-check your decisions and what you think you're seeing, make sure that you're working with the same data and the same configuration. The enabling technology, the technology that makes this whole thing possible, is satellite-based navigation. What we most of us think of as GPS. There's other acronyms for it. So when we've got a device, it's got to have access to GPS information. The other one is that once the GPS data is going to be available to us, the device needs to run some kind of soaring specific support software. Now, our enabling technology beyond the external navigation source is the proliferation of small computing devices that have adequate computing power, usable display capabilities, and then a user interface that allows it to present the information or the data to us so that we can use it in our environment. The neat thing is that soaring software, whether it's open source, so done by a group of people, maybe an individual, but it's somebody that loves doing this, or it's done by a business that, in trying to garner additional business for their company. We get the performance algorithms and information that we used to get and then had to carry in our head or on a notebook or on a pad or something like that. We've got mapping representation, which is a whole lot easier to use than having a folded sectional on your lap. And then we get information overlays that tell us other information about what's going on in our flight. And so it's the computing devices, the external navigation data, and the software that's running on those devices. There are two basic types of computers used in the cockpit. The handheld, even if they're mounted in a holding fixture, this is the portable one that you bring to the cockpit. And then the other one's the built-in computers, which may actually be the same device, but it's permanently mounted in the instrument panel. Okay, so our focus this evening is the handheld computers. The computers can fall into one of two categories. They can be standalone. In other words, they are completely independent. They don't require connection to the glider for power or for data. Or they're dependent. They require connection to the glider for either power or data, obviously both if in some cases. What we're focused on is talking about standalone, but recognizing that we still may need to plug into the computer or plug into the glider if it's got instrumentation that the device doesn't have. When I started messing with this, I had a goal of low cost, and then the ideal system is one you already own. And then I like to tinker and I like to think of DIY solutions. And so the other thing on low cost is if I didn't already own something that I could use, I was trying to put together a mechanism that would work for under $200. And I've been successful at doing that. Um, so the other thing that I try for is a standalone system. And that's actually a little bit harder, not so much for the data, but because of the power, because most of the portable devices that are out there aren't designed to run 6 or 8 hours standalone on their battery. I don't care what the manufacturer says, don't believe them. So over the last, I guess 10, maybe 15 years, we've had this list of items that we've used. Originally, we were using Compact or HP personal digital assistants, or maybe a Palm Pilot. Um, so then we gave them external GPS sources. The next ones that showed up were the car navigators, personal navigation assistants. They could also be called a personal navigation device or portable navigation device. These were the car navigators, and they were about the same size as the PDAs. The interesting thing with those is that since they were navigation devices, they did have GPSs in them, but the GPS that was used in those was optimized for highway use. Doesn't mean that it's not usable in the cockpit, but it does mean that there are shortcuts taken in their processing. So it may show up as a limitation in the wind calculations, or if it's also recording for you, the thermals may look strange when you do a playback on the trace because it's not doing it on a fine enough resolution to have, like, for instance, a nice smooth circle. It may look like a octagon or a hexagon, or in worst cases, just a triangle. And then I even played with converting e-readers like the Nook Simple e-readers. Uh, the interesting thing about those is they were monochrome displays, and I ran across the thing and I realized that I actually use the colors to tell me an awful lot of information. But I even came up with a way to mount a small GPS receiver on it and hook it into an internal serial port that they didn't advertise was on the board. So now we've really gone off the deep end for somebody that wants to tinker or somebody that really believes in DIY. So the three down at the bottom are the ones that actually are probably the most likely that you're going to find. We've all got smartphones in our pockets, and it's kind of like the old adage about photography. The best camera you can have is the one you have with you. So if you didn't have your real fancy camera, you had a little box camera, or today we have the cameras on our cell phones. Well, our smartphones are, very capable computers. So the other thing about smartphones is they are required by the FCC to be able to provide location information for emergency services. Most smartphone vendors have incorporated GPS receivers in the phone to meet this requirement. And it's turning out that with iOS, with the Apple operating system, and with the Android operating system, we've generally got a computer with a nice display that can run soaring software. The other thing that we can have is dedicated portable soaring devices with an internal GPS source. So the ClearNavs that I mentioned before, the most common ones that I'm seeing at the airport are the original ODI and now the ODN family from Navitor or from the CU people. When we're looking at smartphones, I've just used Samsung and Apple as what are probably the two largest vendors, but any of them that are smart any of the smartphone vendors. We've got an internal GPS source. We've got a color display. Some will be better than others in direct sunlight. Um, the other thing that you have to deal with is the screen size, although as the last, what, 4 or 5 generations of these things, they've all gotten up into the 6-inch screen range, 6-inch diagonal on the screen. So it's a usable display. The touchscreen works well. Uh, you're usually holding these a little closer or mounting them a little closer to your face, and so you're not reaching all the way to the panel and having your finger bounce in turbulence. And then the operating systems we've got, for the most part, are either Android or iOS. It turns out that XC Soar and its derivatives and Navigator, which is the latest one from CU, can run on both of these operating systems. When it comes to tablets, Samsung I guess it started in 2016, had a very nice little 7-inch tablet that had an internal GPS and had an override on its screen to drive the screen harder if it was in direct sunlight. Unfortunately, that one went by the wayside and Samsung never replaced it. You've got Apple with the mini iPad. The current version is up into the 8-inch range, and so I think some of the older versions were smaller, but the current one is, I think, beyond its size makes it beyond the capability of handling in a cockpit. Interestingly enough, Walmart has a house brand called ONN. It's a 7-inch tablet and it's fairly cheap. I've got more details on it. Now, some of these devices have internal GPS sources. Again, it has the same thing that you run into with the cell phones or the smartphones. Some of them are excellent in direct sunlight. Some might be poor in direct sunlight. And then the other thing is the screen size. Anything much over 7 inches is getting to be larger than probably what you want to be trying to manage in a cockpit. Uh, Even on on a stalk or some kind of holder that's mounted to the side, or you know vacuum, a suction cup to the canopy. Anything over about 7 inches is getting to be way large in that cockpit. And I know people that don't like something as large as a 7-inch screen. Again, these are all touchscreen user interfaces. And again, we're back to iOS and Android for the operating systems. And then we have the dedicated devices. So the original ODIs, the ODN family, and then LXNav has a little device called a Nano 4, which is kind of neat, but it's got a really small screen. And I don't like really small screens anymore. The days of having 2010 vision and being able to see things clearly at arm's length is probably past for me. These all have internal GPS devices. Uh, they may have, especially the ODI, the original ODI, may have a auto style GPS in it. It's an inconvenience. It's not something on the grand scheme of things that's going to make that much difference. So don't worry about it. There was a big deal made a few years back, but if you're saying, you know, I'm trying to solve a navigation from my airport to another location 20 miles away, it's plenty good enough for that. They have color displays and they have a tendency to be pretty good in direct sunlight, especially when once they got the OD2 out. The touchscreen user interface, the larger screens will allow fingertip input. The the original OD and the OD2 used a resistive touchscreen, and so they worked better with the stylus because you had the fine point on the end of the stylus to select the spot rather than the broadness of your fingertip. The operating systems in these range from the Microsoft mobile operating system, which has been deprecated by Microsoft, and Android, or a custom operating system. The only problem with these guys is they can be a little expensive, and I'll have something on that in a little bit. So what do we need when we get one of these devices? The device has to have power, so it's either going to be an internal battery or an external source. We've got to have some method of securely mounting this thing because we don't want it floating around in the cockpit with turbulence or negative G's. So you're going to need to mount it to the airframe. And when I say that, that's the suction cup or uh, the stalk mounted to the instrument panel, but something to secure it, or you've got it on a knee board that's strapped to your leg. But you don't want this thing floating around in the cockpit. The other one is that wherever that GPS antenna is, it needs to be able to see the sky when it's mounted in the aircraft. When we look at the soaring software, the expectation with the soaring software is that it's got a profile for the glider being flown. So we've got the performance information about the glider. So this is used when we've got to have performance-based information. We expect a moving map, so that means we've got a map file. We're expecting airspace representations, so that means we've got an airspace file we've got to get from somewhere, and especially with all of the things that have changed in the last few years, we need to have the special use airspace files, the TFR files, temporary flight restrictions. For our airports and our waypoints, so we've got to have an airport and waypoint database, and then we want to have it work for us, have our selected task. And of course, that's going to be based on the airport and waypoint database. So while it provides these capabilities, you can see that we've got a lot of support information that has to come with it. One of the things that we want from our display is we want a task line with heading recommendations. So you can see the information that that's going to draw from that we've got to maintain. We're going to have wind direction and speed. So at a minimum, we've got some processing that we're going to do, but it's going to be the location information from the GPS is going to be used in helping set up that determination. Nearest landable locations, so our glider profile, the airport database, waypoint database, and then the GPS for the navigation information. Altitude needed to get to an airport or waypoint, or the glide slope information to get to an intermediate landing point that wasn't on our original plan. Okay. So in addition to having the device, the soaring software, we've got a tremendous amount of information that we have to carry with us as well, which means we've got to come up with some way to keep that stuff current. Now, the software. We've got CU Navigator is free for download. It is a limited capability version of CU Navigator, but it will do, one, it will act as a recorder for you and it will do limited navigation capability. Its description, you can see it on the link. And by the way, all the links that are in here this evening have been checked within the last 24 hours. And so if they're in here, they work. Navigator will run on iOS, so it works on your iPhone, and it will run on Android. So tablets, other smartphones, or obviously the ODN. XC Soar, and then it's probably what is now the best derivative of it, XC Soar Jet. Uh, at one point, it was running on the Microsoft mobile OS, but it runs on Android, Linux, and XC Soar will run on iOS. I don't know if XC Soar Jet will run on iOS. Whereas CU Navigator was developed by Naviteer, the CU folks, XC Soar and XC Soar Jet and LK8000 are open source projects staffed by volunteers. So the development teams can range from one or two folks to a community of developers. The XC and LK8000 are somewhat similar products in the dim, dark days of history. Go back 10 years, maybe more. They derive from a common baseline, but each has grown into its own unique product today. I happen to believe that XC is probably the most mature of the open source gliding software. Its user interface is flexible, but it's not as advanced as CU Navigator. XC is available from the website that's referenced there. It was on the Google Play Store, but the person who was the original Fireplug on the project finally opted out, and with that, the Play Store uh, presence dropped off, and so the people that are still working with it are working to get it back on the Play Store, but you can download it to install from the website I've got listed up there. The last version of this software was released in September of last year, and I'm sorry, September of 2024. It's version 7.43, and that's the current version. They're working on a release, I believe, for a little later this spring of 7.43. XC Sword Jet is a derivation. Uh, the main change, it has some UI changes to the info boxes that are available, but it mainly integrates the SkySight weather model. So it's got some user interface improvements, but the big thing is that it natively will work with the SkySight model so you can have overlays in flight. It is in the Google Play Store. The last version was released about 3 days ago. Last update was about 3 days ago. LK8000 is also available for the Microsoft operating system, Android, and Linux. It's available from the Google Play Store. The last version was released in May of 2023, but the websites and stuff are still fairly active, so I'm pretty comfortable saying that that's available and usable. There used to be a variation of XC called Top Hat. Nothing has changed with that since roughly 2017, and you can download it from a website, but I basically say that that's a dead end product at this point. I know there are people that are still using it and they're very happy with it, but if I were starting my journey down this path, that's not the one that I would start my journey with. That might be one that I would use as long as it could limp along because I'm so used to it, but I don't see it as a good starter. On software purchases, now there are more than these. If you go look on either the Android or I mean Google Play Store or on the Apple App Store, uh, but iGlide is switched out. It uh, is now owned by a new company called Navilogic. Uh, Air Avionics is not doing the software anymore. This is the prices as of today. And so you can get the light, the advanced, and then the pro. And that's actually reduced somewhat from the prices that I had from the last time I did this presentation. This is obviously an iOS. Well, I say obviously, I couldn't find an Android version of it. So, and then CU Navigator. Okay, so when we talked about the free version, that was a simple flight recorder with some navigation capabilities. And now what we're talking about is the full-featured computer. The last time I did this presentation 2 years ago, I felt that Navigator still needed some work to be as usable as the original Odie or to be as usable as XC Soar. Um, Interestingly enough, I was using Navigator all year for 2025, and it did everything that I asked of it. Notice that, uh, yeah, it's running on both iOS and Android. So my primary software for the 2025 season was an Android tablet running Navigator. When we look at the devices, okay, now this all depends on how much of a tinkerer you are. Some devices you may have to adapt the either the hardware or the operating system to get it to run the soaring software. For instance, when I was playing with the Nook Simple Touch readers, it turned out that they were running a stripped down version of Android and it needed some massaging to get it up to the point that it could comfortably run the soaring software. I don't recommend that path for anyone anymore. I don't even use it myself, but it was a fun little thing to play with when I was doing it. Uh, when we're looking at the soaring software, there is probably some configuration to the displays, although the default displays that they come up with may be adequate. Most of the soaring software will have a number of things that could be added or subtracted. So that's one of the things that you have to work with to figure out what is your workflow and what information do you need to make the decisions you make in the cockpit. Okay. The other one is it's got to be configured for the glider that you're flying. And the one thing I left off of here is it's also got to be configured for the location that you're flying. And all of these configurations need to be reviewed at least annually. When it comes to the data, okay, maps. Lynn Alley has, I've sung his praises previously. Lynn Alley has a wonderful website, www.soaringdata.info, and there is so much information you can get there that you can use with your devices. XCSOAR and XCSOAR Jet use a proprietary file format, so you have to use their tools to download the files. LK8000 likewise uses a proprietary format that is not compatible with XCSOAR and XCSOAR Jet. Okay. One of the neat things with Lynn Alley's website is for airspace, he can create a TFR file for you. So, like on the morning of the flight, you can put in your airport and put in a radius and it will pull in any of the TFRs, which you then can add to your device. So in addition to being able to do the background maps for you in some cases, he's got the capability of picking up airspace and TFRs and stuff like that. So that's under the airspace heading. And I find that to be extremely useful. In fact, that's one of the things that XCSOAR actually has a place that you can have your main airspace files, and then he has another heading where you can drop in additional airspace files like a TFR file for the day. And then we have term points. Of course, we've got the soaringweb.org. Uh, we've talked about that before, is that the data can be out of date. So, if you've got somebody at your local airport that's keeping track of good term point database for your local area, and just hasn't uploaded it to the term point database, that's, work locally for that. Because there's nothing that says that all the data that's on that worldwide term point exchange is current. The other thing you're going to want is you're going to want to have your tasks. Um, I'm kind of silly about it, but I keep like 10 or 15 tasks in my computer at all times. So I'm sitting at the airport and I'm going, oh, I think I want to do a 300K out and return to Greenhorn Peak from Kelly Air Park. Well, it's already in there so that I've got it and I can just load it and say, okay, we're going to run this task. Again, all of these maps and airspace files and term point files are things that need to be reviewed at least annually. User preferences. Okay, this is what I played with for 2025. So I ran in my ASH 26, I ran CU Navigator on a XC Touch Nav 7-inch tablet. And last year I finally installed the tablet permanently in the panels. But that kind of tablet could be a portable as well. I use CU Navigator on my iPhone in our ASK21, and I've used the ClearNav units in our ASK21 for when I'm doing cross-country mentoring flights. The One of the things that I see with CU Navigator is the ease of use. The problem that I see with CU Navigator is, for the most part, it seems to be running about a quarter circle behind on the thermal helper, which means that trying to use the thermal helper, uh, you've got an offset in your processing in your mind. So where your nose is pointed, what the thermal helper is showing you is up to about a quarter circle behind. The other one that I see with CU Navigator, and this was a holdover from the CU Mobile, the OD software, is that the climb performance is based on the MacCready settings. So the thing that says you're doing good is based off your MacCready setting, not on that you're just climbing. So for instance, if you've got your MacCready set for 3, and if your achieved lift is 2 knots, then the nagging Nancy colors are going to make it look like you're in sync when they're really telling you you're just not performing as well as the MacCready setting uh, for your climb. And so, you may want to reconsider either your MacCready setting, or you may want to reconsider that this thermal was worth taking in the first place. I get myself dug into a hole often enough. I like it when the colors are telling me, I'm in lift, because there are days that 1 knot lift is really nice, regardless of what I think the MacCready setting I'm going to use for my next run is. The other one that you run into, and I think I mentioned it earlier, is that a touchscreen can be real pain when you're in rough air, especially if the screen is mounted close to the panel. You've got a stalk that brings it out from the panel, but it's only maybe 2 or 3 inches shorter reach than reaching all the way to the panel. With your arm all the way out there, if you're bouncing around, it's really kind of hard to be precise with your fingertip touch. This is the tablet that I was talking about from Walmart. If you want to play the DIY system, these guys are cheap. I've seen them as low as $35 when they're on sale. The current batch is running Android 14. The only problem is that it doesn't have a GPS. So you've got to give it an external GPS, and I'll show you a possibility on the next slide. So there's no GPS, so it's not a standalone device. The batteries, they claim a battery life of 10 hours. Don't believe it. 2, 3, 4, but beyond that, the thing you want to be careful of with these guys, and this is also true for your cell phones. When you go fly, start with your device fully charged, and then if you're connecting it to a USB port in your glider or something like that, it will generally maintain the battery charge. But if you put it in there and try to charge it from your aircraft, you go in with a half charged battery, it's possible that the thing's going to overheat and shut down. That's probably the disadvantage of the commercial stuff that hasn't had any work done on it to get it to handle heat loads better. So when you're using these kind of devices, you want to go into the flight with it fully charged if you're plugging into your plane to keep it running. Don't go in with it half charged. The other thing is that with these tablets, they're not as bright as the dedicated tablets, and at this price point, they don't have the overdrive for the display that the old Samsung had. I've tested this thing with XC Soar, with XC Soar Jet, everything works. You will need a network connection, so you're probably using your cell phone, your smartphone as a hotspot, and then connecting this to it in order to get the uh, SkySight model data, because it wants to download it in real time. At this point, XC SoarJet does not do cached SkySight model data. CU Navigator, everything works. Of course, if you're using the full up CU Navigator, you're going to use a CU subscription, which is 50, 60-ish dollars a year, but that also includes CU for your PC. And in addition, plus it's access to all of the other CU online stuff. Again, if you're trying to use either SkySight or Top Medio or that kind of thing, you're going to need a network connection. So now for GPS, if you've got a device that doesn't have a GPS in it, these two little devices are GPS sources. The top one is no longer made, but you may be able to find it as new old stock. The red one was current production a year ago. And the thing that you have to be careful of, especially if you've got a device that doesn't have an internal GPS, is the protocol stack for Android may not have uh, a GPS device in the stack, but there's a helper app on the Android store called Bluetooth GNSS, and it will install on your device, and then it talks to the GPS and then passes the data on to your device. These guys can handle 1 hertz, which is the standard GPS signal, 1 pulse per second, and they can also go to 10 hertz. And XC SoarJet and XC and CU Navigator and XC Soar, everything works. So these are nice, and that way you're not stringing cables to have you're not stringing data cables because these will connect via Bluetooth. When we look at ODI's Navigator, or oh, not Navigator, we look at OD2. There's the OD2, and then there was the ODI IGC. This is an old device. It's end of life as far as the company is concerned, but they're still out there and they still work, and the software is still getting updated and that kind of thing. It's very capable. It's very configurable. Generally, the software license goes with the device, which is kind of nice. It can interface to the glider via cable if you needed to plug it in for data or charging, like you wanted to plug it into a Vario to get the Vario information and stuff like this. But it will work as a standalone device. The OD2 and later have a bright, and I say ish, display. It's got the internal GPS. The IGC version is approved for badges and that kind of thing. You should be able to pick these up around $200. I say 200 to 300. I would think 100 and a half to maybe two and a half. It's no longer produced. Parts and services are still available. So, like Cumulus Soaring still has replacement screens for them. They still have batteries. Of course, it's limited to what he's got on stock. It's a resistive touchscreen rather than a capacitive touchscreen. So we're all used to capacitive touchscreens on our cell phones and our iPads and our Android tablets. This guy, you actually got to get a little bit of pressure on it. It's not just sensing the electrical change your finger makes. So it works better with a stylus. It's a 5-inch screen, and it's limited battery life, probably around 2 hours. So again, I would plan on having a maintenance power cable to it, start with a full charge. Now, the IGC version has a larger battery, and it claims that it can run for 11 hours. So you wouldn't, as long as that holds true, then no in-flight charging would be needed. And then the current product from Navitier, from the CU folks, the ODN and the ODN IGC. The IGC has a larger battery. The standalone device, its current production, it can interface to the glider via Bluetooth. For instance, uh, like I have an S100 in my 26, and I interface that through Bluetooth to my tablet. It's got a nice bright display. It's got a good internal GPS. It does have the IGC version. It claims 15 hours of battery life. So, but I'm always kind of hesitant when they claim, that kind of battery life. It's a 5.5-inch screen. The only problem with this device is compared to the DIY solutions or the solution you already have in your pocket, i.e. your smartphone, these are expensive. The ODN right now is listed for $890 and the N IGC is listed for $1,190. They have Navitor has been really good about supporting these devices, and if they find problems, shipping them back and getting them reworked and back to you. Uh, it's not free, or at least not always free, but they are supporting these. So if you've got one that's got problems, talk to whoever it was you bought it from, whichever your favorite gliding vendor is, and work out how to get it back and get worked on and then get it back to you. But these are supported, and that's important. When we talk about working with these things, we've got to have a familiarization. Okay. So the handheld devices, for instance, uh, the software may have a simulation mode to where you can hold the device in your hand and maybe even possibly play back a flight that you've already made. The first use of this is to help you decide how you want to set up the device, especially if it's a flight you remember. You can observe the flight and the decisions that you made and what you would like to make and what kind of information do you want displayed to help you make those decisions. The other one is a practice to use your skills in using the glide computer. So they can also work with Condor. The OD has a special cable that allows you to plug into the computer that will allow the OD to connect to Condor, receive the simulated GPS data, and so that you can have that in front of you and working with it. Navigator has a special Bluetooth dongle for it to do that. XC Soar can connect using Wi-Fi. Uh, I don't know if it's in the current Condor 3 manuals, but the Condor 2 manual has a real good description of the kind of helper software that you need to use and the port addresses that you want to use. But it's interesting. It does connect up into Condor 2, or it did connect into Condor 2. I don't have 3 on my machine, so I don't know how it would work with 3. PC simulators for your cockpit computer, and we'll be using the one for XC Soar here in a little bit. Uh, there's a PC software for the ODI, so the old CU mobile software. And then for XC Soar, they have a PC version, and I've got the links for them right there. What this allows you to do is you can play back a flight again and examine the decisions you made and examine the data you have displayed on your device to help you make decisions. The other one is you can run through this and get yourself familiar with all of the little pieces of data that are going to pop up on the screen to help you make decisions. There's a real interesting thing that popped up out of the FAA. So Advisory Circular 9178A, which A was the one that I reviewed, it looks like 2 years ago. So it might be a B by now. But the big thing is the use of electronic flight bags. So basically, these devices can behave as an electronic flight bag, which means if you've got required information you're supposed to have in the cockpit with you, and I've got a list of things like your pilot handbook and its supplements or minimum equipment lists or weight and balance calculations or aeronautical charts, terminal procedures. Okay, this is an approved method of having this information with you. Okay. Now the ones I have bulleted were listed in the document. I just pulled them out with bullets for emphasis. But it is completely valid if you've got a current version of the aeronautical charts on your device. That's considered by the FAA to be adequate for having the aeronautical charts and the other procedures in the cockpit with you. Okay, this is a navigator screenshot. This is my screen layout, or at least it was the screen layout I started last year with. I've evolved it a little bit, but I wasn't down at the airport this week to get a screenshot off of my current device. So the things that Navigator allows you to do, it allows you to get an arbitrary box, info box layout. For instance, I'm going to play some games here. Okay, this is a menu to get to your uh, flight setup information. I've got info boxes with my battery, the current time, my flight time, and then this is a access to a menu that controls the overlays that I display. So whether I'm displaying terrain or whether I'm displaying weather or whatever. This little info box is a mode box. So right now it just says you're standing stationary. Here's the thing that's got my scale for how much I'm zoomed in or zoomed out. Okay, these can be placed anywhere on this screen. You know, for instance, my little compass indicator up here. Um, each of these boxes. So for instance, not only can they be placed individually anywhere, they can also be resized. So this target box up here, so this is the waypoint that I'm going to, that is one box that has been stretched so that I can see all of the information that I want to see with my distance and the altitude that I'm going to arrive at above my safety altitude or in relation to my safety altitude and what time the computer thinks I'm going to get there. And I have that in blue because that's information that I want to glob onto fairly easily. Right here, I have my current lift over drag and the required lift over drag or glide ratio, I'm sorry, current glide ratio and required glide ratio. And so that gives me a real quick, can I get there from here? As long as that ratio is greater than one, I stand a real good chance of getting there. I have my current barometric altitude right here. Underneath it, I've got the AGL, which is derived from the GPS. I fly a motor glider. So one of the things that I have in my processes is when I come down to a certain altitude AGL, I make my decision. Am I going to use the engine or not? Another altitude, I start my start sequence, you know, depending on how the conditions are. And then there's another altitude AGL where I say, okay, the engine's not running, I'm landing. Okay, so this is, to me, this is important. I have my McCready setting, and right under that, I have the speed to fly that corresponds to that McCready setting. So I always get a little reminder right here about, you know, for the McCready setting I'm using, I could be flying a little faster. And then I have information in here about my average climb and what my last thermal was, wind direction. I always want to know what my ground speed is. Just one of those things that I like to have in the back of my head. So I have it sitting here, and then I have the status of the GPS receiver that's feeding the device. So so all of those could be organized. The little triangle right here is the location when I have the map background on. That's the location of my glider, and then there's my heading line. So it allows arbitrary box layout. It allows you to have individual box colors, and it allows you to have individual box size adjustments. I have the stuff that I use the most at the top of my screen, and I have the stuff that is nice to know or I don't use it very often down here at the bottom of the screen. I know that other folks fly with all of the boxes at the bottom, so that's just the map background and the course lines and stuff at the top. I know other folks that line them up down one side or the other or both. Okay. That again is how much information do you want in front of you and how do you use the information you have in front of you? This is the screen layout that I use for XC XC is a little more primitive. For instance, the boxes, uh, Navigator, I got to choose how many boxes I had or how many fields I had displayed on the screen. Here, I get, for instance, at this point, I've got 12 boxes with four of them at the top and, or eight of them at the top and four of them at the bottom. Okay, those are settings that I can't adjust all of the data fields and the locations and the individual sizes like I can with Navigator. So that's a shortfall, but then again, this is an open source product, not a commercial product. Each of these two pieces of software have different things that are advantages. Uh, one has a little better than the other. For instance, XC Soar right here where I'm moving my cursor puts a climb band indicator, so it shows you what the strength band has been for the day. It will actually put markers in there to indicate the lift band. Where's the lift band versus if you drop out, maybe you should be getting a thermal real soon now rather than putting it off. It also has an indicator over here on the left, but because we're sitting still, it doesn't show. That gives me a visual indicator of how I'm doing on my final glide. Am I above my glide slope? Am I below the glide slope? And it actually can display it with uh, at my current McCready setting and a McCready 0 setting. Again, I should put in a thing to them. I would like it to be my safety McCready, not a McCready 0, but come back for the speed to fly session for why I have that distinction. So these guys are some of them, all of the software has its strengths, all of the software has its weaknesses. It's just a matter of which one do you like, which one works the way you wish to work. All righty. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to run XC Soar, the PC simulator version, and I'm going to bring up a flight that I did last year over at Nephi. The Here was the task. So starting Nephi Airport is right here. Here was the start waypoint with the cylinder around it. Down here to a waypoint and its cylinder. Up to this waypoint, its cylinder. Here's the steering cylinder back into the airport, and then the run back to the airport. And if you squint, you can actually see the flight trace for my trace that I flew. And the reason this is smaller is because I didn't go all the way down to the turn point. It was challenging. The weather was challenging down here, and when I ran into the grapple, I said, "Ooh, I don't need to go any further. Let's go to the other turn point, back out here towards Delta, back across, and then home." So we're going to run this flight in the simulator. Yeah. Let's Okay. So here's the screen layout. And a couple of these fields will not populate when we're running because we're running a simulation. On this display, down here in the bottom right corner, where the little guy was standing on the navigator display, there's a series of icons down here that will talk about the mode that you're operating in. So whether you're in cruise or circling or in final glide. As we go through this, let me get it started. And we're going to run this. We're going to run this at 10 times speed. That's another change I would like to see them do. I'd like to see them get it up to the 40x that the CU Navigator does on the desktop, or not Navigator, but the CU software does on the desktop. So we're going to start this guy and close that. Okay, so right now what you're watching is positioning of the aircraft around the airport. We'll take off here in a moment. So there's our takeoff, and now we're moving. So over here on the left, I need 15,300 feet to fly the task. And up here in the corner, you'll start to see it adding uh, thermal information. Right here, you can see a line that's expanding out. That's the amoeba. The amoeba that's how far I could go from my current altitude before I touch the ground. Now notice the airport up here, it's purple. That means it's a yet landable field, and the green circle around it means that I could get back to it. And that white box is saying that if I turned and ran to the field, I would get back to the field at 900 feet above my safety altitude. So there's a lot of information showing up on this screen. The red lines are highways. The red circle, that's a special use airspace. That's a drop zone for a parachute jump outfit. I get a thermal helper here in the bottom left. And basically what it's doing is it's showing me, my glider is shown here because I'm turning left. It's showing me the strength of the circle of the thermal that I'm in. When it fills out full like that, I've actually got it pretty well centered. Over here in the left, top left over here, you can see that the climb profile thus far. It drops off about 1,000 feet above the ground. So there's a ground level indicator there. And later on, you'll see it put little bars across, and the bars will be for the lift band. So the top left box is the distance to my waypoint, and there's a little number down at the bottom, which is the heading. If I turn to that heading, I would go to this is how much, the second box from the left is how much I've gained in this thermal. The box below it is what the last 30 seconds has been, the averager for 30 seconds. And the box next to it to the right is what is the total average climb rate for the entire thermal. Below the distance one is the altitude I'm going to arrive at the waypoint. So if it's a landing field, that's the altitude above my safety altitude, above my arrival altitude that I want. My McCready number, and below the McCready number is the speed to fly, and then my barometric altitude, and then my height above the ground. Down at the bottom left, when will I probably get to the ETA for getting to the waypoint, the ETA for finishing the flight, and then here's my duration. So I've been in the air for 30 minutes now, and then here's the current time. You can see that it does give us a breadcrumb trail. So you can see where the thermal was, and then you can see the breadcrumb trail. We won't get to start on the task until we are, about 45 minutes flight duration, because you have to give, this was a contest, so everybody had to get up into the air and have, I think it's 20 minutes to get up to good thermaling altitude before they do the start. I don't remember the rules that clearly. And then you can see the little icon down here. The icon, if you can see the icon, that's the thermaling icon. Now, when I roll out and head out straight on course, this thermal helper over here on the left will disappear. So it's not there for the whole flight. You can see my course lines laid out, and you can see that I've got the radius around my turn points. And then the turn point is colored in because I have not, this is a start cylinder, so I haven't started yet. Once I start, then the background color will disappear. So there's all kinds of information that's on this screen. And even from where I am right now, so I'm sitting at 15,000 feet, so I'm above the top of the start cylinder. Uh, I'm only 4,000 feet less than what I'd need to fly the whole thing for minimum distance. Fly the whole thing for minimum distance. That's what the number right here is telling me on the left. And again, you can see the airport back here. The purple center says that's a landable field. The green around that purple says that I can arrive at my safety altitude. So and I've got the safety altitude set for 1,000 feet, so I can arrive at pattern altitude. You can see the north arrow over here in the top right. And I just crossed the line. Notice this background disappeared out of the radius, out of the circle. And so now I'm running in a straight line, or I'm not running a straight line. I'm running the course. What I remember of this day, the clouds were real interesting. And what I was doing is I was looking for the dark lines under the cloud. It was actually fairly overcast. And you can see where I get a bright green in the breadcrumb trail. That's where I was climbing while I was flying in a straight line at, uh, down here at the bottom, I've got in the 90 knot ground speed range. So, that's the fun thing is to be running along at 90 knots and climbing. You can see the terrain. I've got a terrain map on the background. Normally, when I'm flying, I don't run the terrain map. I run a convergence, uh, weather convergence map on the background rather than terrain. And you can see over here on the top left that I'm right at the bottom of the lift band. And so somewhere here pretty soon, I'll probably stop and go look for, or stop if I hit some lift. The width of the blue up here is the relative strength at the relative altitude above the ground. So the top of this is the highest I've gotten so far. So that was up around 15,000. You can see the bar with the dot on it. That's where I am at about 12,000. And guess what? I found some lift. So this is the kind of things that you can pull out of the display while you're flying. The excuse me. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go ahead and oops. I'm going to go ahead and stop this simulation. I'm clicking in the wrong box. Sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and or pause this guy. And we've talked about all the settings that you have in these systems. So this is the configuration area to set up the system for this computer. So setting up the files that I'm using, remember I said we have a map file. So here's my map file. Here's my waypoint file. Here's my airspace file. Um, here's the FlarmNet, because I run a Flarm in my aircraft, and so I will end up with it cross-connected so that I have Flarm data. So this will be the contest numbers. Up here at the top, it tells me where on this particular device, so this is my PC, where my data is stored. And to change something, like if I wanted to change the map, here's the list of all the maps I've got stored that I can just switch to have, so if I come back home to Kelly, I can just switch back to my Kelly map and I'm there and it's easy. If you had remember I said that XeSOAR uses proprietary formats for its files, so I can come here to download, and if you've got a network connection, these are all the possible maps that have already been created around the world. Uh, so the indicator in front of the map is the nation. So Arizona, California, these are all maps that are available. And so if I wanted, oh, let's say I was going to go down to Seminole and fly there, I could click on this, tell it to download, and now it switched to it. So it's in my list now. I'm going to put it back on Nephi, but that's how easy it is to get the map, if that's what you were chasing. And then, so that's the site files, how we want the display to look. So I've been running this with when it's in cruise, I've been running with track up so that the nose is pointed to the top of the screen. But when it's circling, I have it point with no north up so that the map background stays stationary and the little airplane spins. And so I can set up things about am I going to see farm traffic? How long is the breadcrumb trail? And how complex is the airplane symbol if that's what I want? What does the wind arrow look like? Those kinds of things. The labels, like the boxes that came up, I was pointing to at the airport and said it, told me, how high I was and what the identifier was. The landable symbols for landables, in my database, I have them marked as landable and I have it put a purple circle on it. And then when it puts a green band around the circle, then then I can get there at pattern altitude. The terrain display, what do I want to show for the terrain? Um, and then my airspace. So I'm displaying all of my airspace. I didn't put labels on the airspace. I've got warnings. So if it says I'm getting close, it's going to tell me I'm getting close. If I'm inside, it's going to tell me I'm inside. I can set how long it's going to stay on, the warning's going to stay on the screen. I can set the transparency level of the special airspace. Here's where I set my arrival height. I have it set for 500 feet for terrain clearance. And then how do I get, my alternates? Now, for each of these fields, you can come in and you've got choices. And then down here at the bottom, notice I've got a help button. So this gives me a description of, it determines how things are sorted on how I'm going to select which alternates, how the alternate list is. So that's what it's telling me. So you have help associated with each of these. Notice I've got my McCready safety factor set for about 1.9. And the STF risk factor, the speed to fly risk factor, that's a concept that John Cochran worked out. And, it's how do you modify your speed to fly for risk? And that's a whole little dissertation on its own. But so safety factors, the glide computer, what am I showing on the screen? What am I using? That kind of thing. Oh, one of them was how long do I take when I switch from cruise to circling for it to show up? So I switch from cruise to circling about 10 seconds after it detects the turn. And going from circling to cruise, I have it wait for about 15 seconds. So a little bit longer because when I come out of the thermal, I may actually just be repositioning a little bit and I don't want it to come out to cruise and then go back to thermal if what I was really doing was just repositioning over to the side a little bit, but I rolled out wings level. I can set up how the winds are calculated. and how I do routing. So for instance, I can use nothing. I could use just terrain, or I could use airspace. So I want to avoid terrain. I want to avoid airspace. In my case, I set it for both. And then reach, I have it set up for, you can turn it off. You can say it's a straight glide from where I am, or it's a turning flight. In other words, it avoids terrain, or it avoids airspace. So when it's giving me a solution and says you can get there, that's the thing. And then I use my safety MacCready when I'm working on my reach polar. So when it's trying to figure out if I can get there, I'm using my safety MacCready, not MacCready Zero. And again, we'll talk about that in the speed to fly session in a few weeks. And then remember, I showed you the amoeba. So it had a line, and then it was a little bit shaded so that you could see the boundary a little clearer. And then you know, how you want to use, you know, whether I want to have the FLARM radar screen on, or I just want to use FLARM because I've got for instance, my S100 gives me a real nice FLARM uh, display, so I don't need to have the FLARM radar on my tablet. So I don't use the FLARM display, but it will display the aircraft. And then here's my thermal assistant that you saw on the bottom left. And then the thermal band thing that I was talking about, the final glide bar, the final glide at MacCready Zero. And like I said, I'd like him to make that a MacCready Zero or safety MacCready. All my ballast stuff and other gauges that I could show on the screen that I don't use. And then here's how I set up the tasks for max start speed, the max start height, finish minimum height, and whether it's AGL, and whether or not, what the wait time is. If you're flying in contests, you've got what they call the pilot event. And, they use that to say, oh, I tripped this and I've got to wait so many seconds or so many minutes after I've tripped it before I can cross the start boundary. How I set up the turn points, whether it's a cylinder, whether it's a line, whether it's an FAI quadrant, whether this is a racing task or a assigned area task, which is what I'm showing on the system right now. And then language input. When it says language automatic, it's just getting the language that your tablet's using, that you use. Screen layout. So this is the one I said that it's not as flexible as Navigator. So I've got 12 nav boxes split into 3 rows. FLARM display will be at the bottom right, and where the message will displays in the middle, and if I've got coloring on my info boxes or not, that kind of thing. And then this is the layout, the page that you use to do the layout with. Which info boxes do you want where? And then there are 3 modes: circling, cruise, and final glide. You could add other pages with other information if you wanted. And then here's my pilot information. And then this is my units. So I do airspeed in knots. I did the distance in statute miles because I was showing a contest flight. My lifts in knots, altitude in feet, temperature in Fahrenheit. So this is all configurable. So these are all settings that almost any of the computers are going to support. Here's my UTC offset. Some of the software will pick up that it's daylight savings, and some of it won't. These are how I want to track if I want to be tracked by Skyline or Live Track or something like that. XC Soar Cloud. Here's one of the weather things. WeGlide setup. So those are the setups for the configuration of the device. We end up also with setups for the plane. So for instance, I have Here's my 26, so I could activate it. Um, it's already active, but I can go down here. I could edit this one, so I could change some of the settings, maybe change the wing area or the wing loading or something if I wanted, or how much ballast I could carry, what my empty weight is versus my how much max I have, what my ballast dump time is, what my max cruise speed is. And so I can copy it, I can delete them, I could activate them. So the top one up here is my old LAC 12. This is the Club's K21. These two are my old Ventus, one at 15 meter and one at 16.6 meters, because I had this on a portable that I would carry between planes. So there's the setup for the aircraft. And then you've got all of the various devices that you could hook up to. So for instance, um, when I had this in my Ventus, I had a Cambridge 302, I had a FLARM, and then I had this generic TCP port 4353. That was for when I hooked it up to Condor. And let's see what else. Built-in GPS sensors. If I didn't have anything hooked up to it, it would go to those and the order up here. So it will look for the Cambridge first. It'll look for the FLARM on the data interface device that I used to have because it was a hardwired system. And then it would look for the TCP port, and then it would look for the UDP port. And then if it didn't find any of those, it would go down here because the device this was on had its own GPS in it. So it would work its way down the list. So I didn't have to set this up for each specific aircraft unless I had a hardwire system or I was using it with Condor. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility. And again, like I said, um, it's not just XC Soar. Navigator's got similar kinds of capabilities. So anyway, the other thing is you've got to have a way to set up your tasks. And so here's the task I've got set up in here. I can manage the task. I can declare a new task, or I can create a new task. I can declare it. I can save it in my database. I could go look at my tasks that I've got saved on WeGlide, that kind of thing. I can look at the rules associated with the task. So what kind of task is it I'm flying? And what's my max start speed, my max altitude, my minimum finish altitude? And then I can also adjust things on the display. I can zoom in or zoom out. I can pan around if I want. That all allows me to do that. Saw the configuration. So system, plane, devices, the flight for the winds can come over here with profiles. So this is for pilots. If you're sharing this with somebody, then you can each have your own profile and your own setup. Here's my waypoint editor, my file manager, and the replay that I was using a minute ago. And some other things that I've never figured out how to use because I just don't play with it. You can get information about the flight. Uh, so the current status of what's going on my task. So where's my location? What's my altitude? The max I've gained? What am I near? My bearing and distance. I could look at my system, so I've got a good G3D lock. Um, my FLARM is connected, or in this case, it's not connected. I can look at status on the task, look at the rules, and I can come over here for time so I can get the UTC time, my local time, how long I've been in the air, what time I took off, those kind of things. So this information, whether you want it on your display screen or not, or you just want to have it out here so that you can look at it. Uh, so So the whole purpose behind this was to give you a feel for what you are doing with the what you're doing, what's capable with the settings on these devices. All of them, all of the software will have something like that you can work with. The key, it's kind of like when computers first came out and everybody was trying to learn various software and they had like three different uh, word processing software. And what you finally had to do is you had to identify, I know that I need to be able to do a cut and a paste. So what is a cut and what is a paste in this tool? You know that it's going to support cut and paste. So I've given you some ideas about the things that any of these tools should support. What you have to do with your device then is to go off and figure out, how do I do the layout on the screen? How do I get my uh, waypoint and the time to the waypoint and the distance to the waypoint and the altitude, you know, if I'm coming into an airport, so I have all of this information. So my attempt wasn't necessarily to sell you on XC Soar. My attempt was to show you these things exist. This is the kind of information that you can put in front of you. This is the kind of information that needs to be configured. And what you have to do with whatever tool you choose to use is recognize these things are available. How do I do it with this particular software package on this particular device? And that brings us to questions.
Okay, Dave. Um, Hang on. I have two questions. The first is from Jack. He says he's heard of several discussions online that say that the UDI does not take into consideration of lift and sink. Therefore, it gives a question to your McCready number. His worry is that on the final glide, can you trust your results if you are flying in sync? And then he asks the question, McCready of zero is unsafe for getting to alternative fields?
Okay, the answer to all of that is in the Speed to Fly uh, webinar in a few weeks. Basically, the computer computes um, just a second. The computer computes a glide slope, and then it monitors your progress on the glide slope. But your speed to fly vario is what's actually accommodating the lift and sink that you encounter along the way. And so what you end up doing is you set your speed to fly vario at a lower McCready number, let's say McCready 2, and you set your computer at McCready 3 or 4. And as long as you stay above the glide slope on your speed to fly computer, you are on your vario, then you will make it home because that's a shallower angle than what the computer was calculating. And yes, McCready zero from more than just a little ways out will bring you back with no margin of running into sync.
It doesn't assume any lift or sink in that final.
Right, right. It's computing a geometric.
Okay. Next question is, and I think this is pretty sure this is true, but you are almost at the end. So XC Sort, it can save the flight track for later review, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
it it will work for it will work for the online contest, but it's not a certified, so it won't work for badge or record.
Okay. And so the follow-up to that, James wants to know how that's done. So
Well, actually, in all those configuration settings, one of them was the logger. And so once you set it and you say, I want to use the logger, then it saves every flight. That big list of flights that I went through,
Right.
those were all saved automatically by the device that I sucked this data off of for that was 2014, and that was all my flights in 2014.
So it's buried down in the configuration sections, but
Yes,
it is something you have to toggle on.
right. But once you
Okay.
turn it on, you don't have to turn it on for every flight. It'll do
It'll
it automatically.
it'll stay automatically.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all I have for questions.
All righty. Well, my favorite same bat channel, same bat time in 2 weeks, and it will be Coy Snyder, Dr. Coy Snyder, talking about soaring pilot physiology, and that's an excellent. He's a retired Air Force flight surgeon, and he really does know what it takes to keep us alive and alert and ready to fly. So everybody, have a good one, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.